Good evening. It's 7:20 p.m. and this is Seth Moore coming again at you again with the world news. We promised that we would bring back and that we will bring you a continuation of the Brics Alliance, and we are here to further give you information on how this is developing around the world and how it's affecting multilateral nations and how it's going to be a great, I don't know if I would even call this let me just say that it's going to be so much diversity in this alliance with Brics. Okay, that's the way I'll put it for now. And of course, it is imperative that you keep up with what's going on. And this is why, of course, we are bringing you this information. We're going to be reading some things to you, and we're going to just give you some insights on what's happening, and we'll go from there. And of course, remember to support us on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Amazon.com, Anchor by Spotify, Podbean, Apple Music, and many, many more. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave us your thoughts. So we're going to jump in a minute, and we're going to give you this information as to what's developing and what is actually happening. Okay, so stay with us. We'll be with you shortly in a moment. Okay, we're back. And so here we are. We're going to dive in and we're going to give you this information, what's going on. Alrighty then. One of the clearest trends the world witnessed in 2022 was the acceleration eastward shift in global economic power. Much of this migration was initially achieved through the continuing strengthening of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, with significant progress being made by the BRICS group of the five major emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, in terms of joint policy coordinations, and with several other economies showing clear signs of interest in joining the increasingly influential bloc. 2023 looks set to be the BRICS bloc more impactful year within the global economic and geopolitical landscape. China is clear the economic powerhouse of the BRICS nations, normally the world's second largest economy, and the overall global economic leader when accounting for purchasing power parity. China's expansion and rapidly growing economic influence throughout the world will prove hugely significant for global economic development in 2023, given its ostensibly unshakable alliance with the neighboring BRICS members, Russia. Moreover, the two nations are already leading the way in offering the world a major counterbalance to Western political unions such as the G7, Group of Seven, and with India, Brazil, and South Africa all having deep diplomatic and economic ties with either China, Russia, or both, the BRICS collective is now becoming increasingly aligned across a number of important issues. So what does this mean? And I think I've given you some of this on the other day. And we can come at this several different ways. But we'll start like this. What this actually means economically for global economies across the world. It means that the United States and these European countries have basically held sway and dominance over these economies with the US dollar. Now, although the US dollar in a lot of different ways is weak, I mentioned this before, I want you to pay attention, that the way the dollar stays strong is to weaken other economies. Or putting it in another way, if you can dismantle economies across the globe by either sanctioning those countries, creating coups in those countries, putting in puppet governments, or anything that you need to do to keep those countries weak and insolvent. And a lot of these countries are solvent. A lot of them, when you're talking about third world countries, a lot of these countries are still weak, dollarized. When it comes to, the American dollar, fiat currency, and so forth. And because you have institutions like the IMF and SWIFT and these other entities and organizations who basically what they do is bureaucratically they monitor other nations, economies and GDPs and exactly what they're doing, because of course they already know what they're doing. They know how far they can reach in terms of their growth and what is the actual industry in those particular countries and how they keep those countries solvent. Okay, so this has been a trick of the U.S. and all of these other countries that are aligned in this bloc with U.S., such as the G7, G20, and so forth. And although some of these other member states who are included in the G20 are, I guess decidedly, some of them are pulling away. And so we're going to read on and we'll give you some insight on that. Okay. Okay, and it talked about China being the second superpower in the world globally. See, but what we have to understand is this. With all of these other member states who are aligning themselves with BRIC, you're gonna see as I read that they galvanize and comprise 40% of global population. And so what does that mean? Okay, so for instance, we'll give you an idea would be that Africa by I think it's either by 2030 or 2050, has the youngest populace, will have the youngest populace in the world from 18 to 19 years old, who replace those who are upper age so far as 60 and so forth and so on. So in regards to human capital, in terms of global output, as far as human capital and innovation, Africa is going to be the leading nation in terms of technology and so forth, because right now, Right now, unbeknownst to a lot of people, Africa is one of the most innovative continents in the world. Besides their mineral resource output and so forth, and what they have as far as mineral resources, unbeknownst to a lot of people, there's a thing that's called brain drain. Okay, so what does that mean? And that's going to be another podcast, but just briefly, really quick, brain drain is when developed nations who have technology seek the highest per capita of innovative people who are technologically intuitive. Okay, and so they often say, and I'm sure you've heard this before. They often say that, okay, Africa has nothing to offer in terms of the people unlearned and so forth, and all of this has been done by design. But I want to clue you in on something, okay? And don't ever forget this. I was online and I was trying to find, and we all already know the contributions that Africans have made in terms of technology to the United States. And often they'll go in the past and they'll say about, this, that, and the other. But let me tell you this. Most of the technological advancements in the United States and even around the world have been done by Africans. Don't get it twisted. Make no mistake about that. I'll give you this, most of NASA's high technology advancements, and even in the military and all these technological advancements, as far as, the jets and apparatuses being put in Mars and on the moon, have been invented by Africans. You can check for yourself. All of these things have been invented by Africans. And so what brain drain has everything to do with is the fact that a lot of these countries that are developing in the continent now, oftentimes what happens is a lot of these genius people, innovative individuals, are pulled out of Africa and they leave the continent because, number one, the dollar is not as strong. Okay, they really can't make the money that they can make in the U.S. And so they pull these genius people out of the continent. They go to these European and foreign countries, such as, the U.S. They come to the U.S., of course, and they're going to France, and they're going to Germany, and they're going to Switzerland. They're going to all of these other countries, and they're lending their genius, and they're creating all of these massive innovations in these countries. And they leave these countries, and of course, at some point they come back home. They make money in the U.S., they make money in Europe, and then they'll come back home. A lot of them come back to the continent, and then they'll begin to set up schools and so forth, and stem cell institutions and research and so forth. But they had to leave the continent to bring this technology to the U.S. and to these other European countries. So this is why you see the U.S. so advanced in technology. Trust me, that's why they're so advanced, because it's the African mind. It's the African mind. Make no mistake about it. And then, of course, when you look at places like India, India is another place. India is another continent that's technologically advanced, where they recruit a lot of people from India because they're very smart. So when you say India, you're really saying Africa too. You might as well. So that's what's going on. So of course we'll get into that some other time, but because that's another podcast. But let us read on. Indeed. Okay, because these unions that have been set up over the Brics bloc and so forth. Okay, so let's read this. Moreover, the two nations are already leading the way in offering the world a major counterbalance to Western political unions, such as the G7, read that already, and and of course with India, Brazil, and South Africa, all having deep diplomatic and economic ties with either China, Russia, or both. The BRICS collective is now becoming increasingly aligned across a number of important issues. Indeed, research has shown that in the decade following South Africa's formal acceptance into the bloc in 2010, which turned Brits into Brits, okay, which turned Brit into Brits, the five nations managed to coordinate policies across some 70 key issues. Some of its biggest achievements include the establishment of the New Development Bank, NDB, which is now financing key infrastructure projects across the world, as well as the creation of the BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement, CRA, a mechanism of providing support through additional liquidity and other means to BRICS countries during times of economic crisis. But as the world has become increasingly polarized over the last year or so, the bloc has stepped up efforts to advance its economic interests, in which turn is helping to cultivate robust alternative financial systems that are now rapidly expanding in their global appeal. So again, what does it mean? In order to offset the US dollar, BRICS is formalizing their own financial institutions in which they intend to, with all these member countries coming together, coming under one currency. And see, because, again, the United States has had a monopoly on keeping, like I said, keeping the currency as strong as they could keep it. Okay? And in turn, what that does, and I don't say this to, scare you, because some people say, okay, if you're putting this out here where they're trying to de-dollarize the dollar, and what does that mean for us? Well, honestly, it means that there's gonna be some troubling times. That's what it means. Because when you look at how the U.S. has dealt with a lot of the countries around the world over the last couple of 100 years, they're not very well liked. And so this is why now the continent does not trust the U.S. And so the continent is withdrawing their support. Or let me put it this way. The continent is withdrawing from actually doing business with the U.S. The U.S. has military bases all over the continent, and France has some, and other European countries have some. And it's not to protect the continent against insurgency. It's not to protect the continent in regards to any Al-Qaeda. All of these groups have been made up by the United States. All of these groups, Antifata, and all of these groups have been made up by the CIA and the United States to destabilize these countries so that the United States can keep a foothold in the country and continue to have what do we want to call it? I guess you could say bureaucratic exploitation, where on paper they can go into these countries and they can do exactly what they want. They could set up these puppet governments and go in there and create havoc among the nations. Look what they did to Libya. I mean, look what they did to Iraq. You know what I'm saying? And so, of course, the U.S. is not well liked. And this is one of the main reasons why BRICS was formed, was to de-dollarize the U.S., because U.S. has done, and think about it this way as well. Do you think for 1 minute that the U.S. is going to deal amicably with the continent or any other nation. They're not going to deal with them unless they can have an advantage. And the advantage is to usually go in, exploit, and leave these countries ravished and poor. And it's unfortunate, but that's the truth of the matter. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, let's continue. Okay, but it says again, but as the world has become increasingly polarized over the last year or so, the bloc has stepped up its efforts to advance its economic interests, which is in turn helping to cultivate robust alternative financial systems that are now rapidly expanding into their global appeal. Okay, one of the most significant objectives that BRICS nations appear to be working to achieve is a shift away from reliance on the U.S. dollar. Listen, they want to shift away from reliance on the U.S. dollar, okay? Even before the outbreak of the war in the Ukraine, which seems to have expedited, de-dollarization initiatives across much of the non-Western world. Russia and China had embarked on clear policies of local currency promotion, invariably at the dollar's expense. As their relationships with the United States continue to deteriorate. By the first quarter of 2020, for instance, the dollar's share of the bilateral trade between the two countries fell below 50% for the first time on record, having been almost 90% just 5 years earlier. Now listen to that. So it's showing you clearly that the dollar is losing its value. Such de-dollarization initiatives are happening largely under the radar of contemporary scholarship, noted Zongying, Zolu, and Makila Papa of Tufts University, Massachusetts, in their research paper, Can BRICS De-Dollarize the Global Financial System?, published online by Cambridge University Press on February 24, 2022. The same day that the war began between Russia and Ukraine broke out, leaders of these initiatives are reform-oriented rising powers, including strategic adversaries of the United States that have expressed discontent with the existing U.S.-led dollar-based global financial system. Okay, now listen to this. I'm trying to figure if I want to skip a little bit. I'm gonna get to how this is affecting and what it will do. Okay, I'll just move on. The 14th BRICS Summit on June 23rd through 24th also saw the five nations, their combined population exceeding 40% of the world's total. When I just mentioned that to you earlier, they have a capacity of this global population of 40% of the people in the world. That's a lot of people. Okay, and so now when you're seeing these other nations that are going to come on and potentially are going to become a part of BRICS, then what you're doing is you're increasingly bringing larger populations to this alliance, and that spells power. So let me read on, and you'll get it. Okay, it says, their combined population exceeding 40% of the world's total deliver a new 75-point declaration under the theme Foster High Quality. BRICS partnership ushers in a new era for global development. One of the started key points was developing a common BRICS payment system, for retail payments and transactions among member countries. This only adds to the earlier work done by China and Russia to launch cross-border payment systems as alternatives to the U.S.-led SWIFT And SWIFT, this is the U.S. organization, SWIFT, which means Society for World Interbank Financial Telecommunications System. Okay, aside from China and Russia, other BRICS founding nations will likely step up their efforts to promote the bloc in 2023. So they have other nations who are going to be coming on. Now listen to this. This is how important this is. Under the leadership of the returning president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Brazil is expected to leverage its status as a BRICS founding member to advance its own development and the economic progress of the wider Latin American region. And Lula win in conjunction with South Africa, which is already a member, and India, which is already a member, should help the BRICS move back to its original role of being a counterweight to excessive U.S. domination and therefore promoting South development. South development. Dr. Ralph Newer, director of Institute of Latin America Studies. Okay, he stated all of this. Now let me read this. He also said, and I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to give you this. Okay. He says it's also expressed interest in leveraging the BRICS contingents, expanding global influence to bring a decisive end to the war in Ukraine. Okay. And listen to this right here. It says China told Rutgers in October, the president, contribute. He has the conditions to take part in a negotiating effort which needs to be led by the European Union and the United States, but with the participation of China, obviously, Brazil can also be an important country whose voice resonates in the developing world, he said. Okay, the BRICS as a group could help. Okay, so this is what I want you to hear. Okay, this is the part I want you to hear. This progress means, that reports published in recent months of several countries applying to join the BRICS countries should come as no surprise indeed. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, acknowledged that at least another dozen countries are interested in joining the bloc. Interest in this global association is very, very high and continues to grow. It is not just Algeria, Argentina, and Iran. In fact, there are more than a dozen such countries, Lavrov said on the November 8th, adding to the group was in the midst of establishing formal entry requirements. Since the applications have already been submitted officially, of course, we expect that working out the criteria and principles for admitting new members to BRICS will not take too long. Okay? And as you just heard me read, you're talking about Argentina, Algeria, Iran, and there's even more. And they said in a dozen more countries. Okay? So you have Argentina, Iran, and then it's widely believed that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Afghanistan, and Indonesia have also either applied already or are due to do so imminently. And additional media reports suggest that Kazakhstan, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Senegal, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates. Okay, so what is this going to actually do for BRICS with all these member countries joining? That is a huge amount of economic power against the United States and against the European Union, the G7 and so forth. So with that type of power, there's going to be challenging invariably with a lot of different issues that are going to bend the pendulum in the way of economic global power. Economic global power as far as foreign trade and so forth and so on. And so this is going to be very powerful. So 2023 is going to be a very interesting year. You heard it here first. Politically, there is going to be global upheaval in the world in 2023, with these member nations coming together to offset and to de-dollarize the United States. So it's going to be interesting to actually see what the United States is going to do as they're continuing with the European countries now to grapple over resources in the continent, okay, and for their survival. Because right now, as I mentioned in many other podcasts, right now France is burning coal. You know, their energy, a lot of these European countries are energy depleted. Their energy is running out. They're burning coal to stay warm, you know, and a lot of these countries are dependent on resource, mineral rich Africa, okay? And so with the backing of China, Russia, and all of these other countries, alliance with Brits, okay, and all of these other nations who, you know, increasingly who are putting in their applications and of course, they're tweaking the criteria as to how these other countries can join. It's not going to be long. It's not going to be long at all before we see the changes actually happening. So again, stay tuned, and we'll be bringing you world news, keeping you up to date as to what's going on. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. You can find us on Spreaker, Amazon, Anchor, Apple Music, and many, many more. So again, this is Seth Moore coming to you with world news. Okay, and we'll be back again. Stay with us.